Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Diehl. I serve on the board of the Interreligious Council of Linn County, and I'm also the president of the Humanists of Linn County. On this morning's show, we're going to talk about American exceptionalism. It's come up in the news lately. Some of you may not be familiar with that term, but this morning I have three distinguished guests with us today that are going to talk to us about it, and hopefully we'll get into a lively discussion and debate, and hopefully learn a lot this morning. So I wanted to just kind of start out with each one of you just giving a brief introduction, your name and what you do, and we'll jump right into the subject.
Start with me?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm John Solow. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Iowa. I'm the chairman of the economics department at the moment.
Excellent.
Jim Conklin, Iowa Conservative Union. Been a resident in this state for 35 years, and everybody's welcome to come out to the Iowa Conservative Union.
And my name is Buckaloo, and I'm a professor of United States history at Coe College, and I specialize in the Vietnam War, and so that's what I do.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you for joining us this morning. And I thought we'd start out with, because it's a term maybe you hear occasionally, but maybe people don't fully understand what it means. I thought, Derek, could you kind of start out giving us a little background about American exceptionalism, or at least a working definition, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Well, that's one of the challenges, is pinning down and defining what American exceptionalism is, because it means different things to different people. It's largely a term that wasn't used very much in the United States until you get to the 1950s, and then it was being used by social scientists and historians to grapple with what made the United States kind of unique and different than Europe. And it often centered on questions like why socialism didn't seem to become as popular in the United States as it had in some European countries. It also sometimes tried to focus on why the United States seemed to survive some of the perils of the early 20th century. The Depression, of course, with the First World War and the Second World War on either side of it. Why the United States experienced that a bit differently than many European countries. Then, in about 2007, 2008, it became much more of a political term, prized by conservatives and Republicans much more than Democrats and liberals, in sort of a congratulating the United States on its greatness and on its distinction from other countries around the world. And it was often used to kind of sort of beat up on Democrats for either not being patriotic enough or not loving America enough in kind of a certain patriotic frame with regard to politics.
And it's kind of manifesting itself in different ways, even into today. I mean, I'm thinking of Colin Kaepernick and just the idea of patriotism, what it means to be, to be devoted to a particular country or promoting whatever. But I did want to talk about, so the Republican platform, and probably I'm going to come at you, Jim, on this one, defines American exceptionalism as, quote, the notion that our ideas and principles as a nation give us a unique place of moral leadership in the world. So the Republican platform tends to focus on moral leadership, and maybe because we are special in a way or exceptional, that we have an obligation. Do you think America is perceived as a moral leader, or should consider itself a moral leader in the world?
Well, first, I'm here representing what I call conservatives. And I enjoyed your speech, but for me, American exceptionalism ties right into the detailed question you're asking. What makes America exceptional? In my opinion, it's the constitutional republic. And when we begin to ask these other questions and we begin to talk about our moral compass, I don't always agree personally with the Republican Party. The plank you're referring to passed with flying colors because we believe in a choice of words that represented most of the conservatives in the Republican Party for things like our social conservatives, other religious-based events. Well, I'm religious, But when I take a look at a political system, be it Republicans or Democrats, I look at them in the light of the Constitution. And I enjoyed the fact that it's being represented by one of us as something that Republicans and conservatives use to beat up liberals. But I constantly hear the other side, where liberals are saying we're not exceptional. And that's really misdirection. In a world of conservatives, what makes us exceptional, to my knowledge, is there are very few countries in this world that have the First Amendment or the Second Amendment. And those two amendments, in my opinion, have kept us off of other paths.
Jim, I would just point out, of course, that Barack Obama spoke about American exceptionalism quite often, and in terms of values, constitutional values, and he was beaten up left and right on Fox News and in lots of locations by Republicans. So
It might have been
I'm
his
wondering about the
interpretation of the
consistency of some.
Constitution.
Well, but he was talking about values, and that
But he
that
didn't
is
believe
not
in the
what-
Second Amendment.
Well,
he doesn't enforce it.
Yeah,
So
well,
But the Second Amendment is
Yeah.
debated in many different ways, and I know
Sure.
that's a big deal for you.
I think your point is that.
But
Go
that
ahead.
is, I would hardly say that the Second Amendment is the defining quality of what makes America great.
constitutional government is what makes America superior to other countries.
I think it would be
That
good.
is not the same thing as
Yeah.
the Second Amendment.
Well, I wanna
And
talk
plenty
about
of other
details.
countries, of course, have constitutions as well.
I think it would be good to have John chime in here and talk a little bit from an economic perspective. I mean, I think it is true to say that American exceptionalism definitely does touch on a lot of the characteristics about our country, and it is true that people disagree. What makes us great? What makes us horrible? I mean, there's all these things that people point to, and I mean, the truth of the matter is, American exceptionalism can actually be the negative qualities of our country, and why that's unique throughout the world. But could you talk a little bit, John, about from an economic perspective?
Sure. Well, so American exceptionalism is not an economics term of art. It really is a political term of art. I would suggest that we as a people don't agree about a lot of things. So to say this is what we Americans think is a little arrogant. That we actually don't all agree with each other, and they're very different viewpoints. I'd say as a purely economic matter, what makes America good is the Constitution, much more than just the Second the Amendment. You have my vote on the First Amendment, by the way, but the Second Amendment, not so much. But it's beyond the Constitution. It's the institutions that we have and the sort of shared common beliefs I hope a lot of Americans have. I feel very much like the parent of a child who's done something really terrible. I love my country, I love my child, but sometimes I'm not very pleased with the things that they do. Economically, we are not, on most dimensions, doing better than the rest of the world. I've got just a few things for you. In GDP, income per capita, we rank 13th in the world. Life expectancy, 28th. We spend twice as much on healthcare as the next highest spending country, but we have the 28th highest life expectancy. And the only countries that we're ahead of are among the reasonably wealthy countries, not the war-torn countries, are places like Latvia and Estonia. Let's talk about the Second Amendment. Out of the high-income countries, we have the highest homicide rate in the world. We have the highest infant mortality rate in the world. We are sixth among the wealthiest countries of people who can't afford food at least once in the last 12 months. On the other hand, we're not the wealthiest, and we have lots and lots of problems. I've always seen American exceptionalism as being a notion that we're great, we deserve to be great, no matter what we do, we are always the best, and that we can't coast on things that happened in the 50s and 60s when America really was the leading nation in the world, and simply assume that all of this is going to happen for us. We have to work for it, and right now we're not doing a very good job of it.
That's excellent. Thank you for those points there. And this will kind of get us to what I want to eventually talk about what is, of course, the campaign that Donald Trump successfully ran in 2016. That's making America great again, right? It has kind of within that this idea of American exceptionalism. But going back to Obama, his quote in 2008 during his campaign against George Bush, he said, quote, "I believe in American exceptionalism, but not one based on our military prowess or our economic dominance." So this seems to kind of imply, that's unquote, this seems to imply that that American exceptionalism isn't so much about how powerful or great or whether we are the richest country on the planet, but rather there is something that, kind of runs deeper than all of that somehow should be emulated or replicated throughout the world. Do you agree with that, or what's your initial thought with that?
Well, I think he uses the word values, and again, this is a point of agreement really with you, Jim, that the Constitution is part of those values. People disagree on certain parts of the Constitution, but that's fundamental. But even thinking, thinking about John's comment about the 50s and the 60s, it certainly was a period where economically and in terms of its place, in the world, in the Cold War system, if you will, the United States had a place of greatness. But even as great as America was then, you had, for example, the effects of racism. In the 50s and the 60s, you're still talking about all kinds of Americans who do not have equal rights. You're talking about an era in which women, of course, couldn't get credit cards or couldn't wear pants if they were in a courtroom and things like this. So there were all kinds of elements even then, as great as America was in certain measures, that I don't think there are all kinds of people in 2018 that would want to necessarily go back to that. When Donald Trump runs on a saying of "Make America Great," in lots of ways that's an emotional, saying. It's not so much about actually going back to 1958. I think there are lots of Americans who wouldn't be interested in that.
Going back to everything I'm hearing from the two gentlemen, it's still about, I'll call it 20 points. The Iowa Conservative Union has a very clear approach. We focus on the 10 Amendments or the Bill of Rights, and we focus on the 10 Commandments. So when my friends here bring up morals, I refer to the 10 Commandments. When we bring up justice, I refer to the Bill of Rights. When we start talking about values, I can tell you I have a moral compass and I have a set of values, but clearly they're both pointed in a different direction than yours.
That's interesting. So,
perhaps not entirely, Jim.
Yeah.
But, we're disagreeing about certain things. But if you prize the Constitution as you do, I mean, freedom of the press, of course, in that First Amendment, and they put it there for a reason.
And they have all the freedom in the world, and Trump has all the rights under the First Amendment to call them out for what they're doing.
Well, I'm not sure that's the effect
you
of what he's doing.
can't say one man's protest is another man's bad action. Okay? Antifa covers their face. Tea Party didn't. I would tell you in your news media world, the Tea Party is bad and Antifa is good. That didn't make any sense to me.
That is not true. That is not fair at all.
Comment.
That's not fair at all.
Say you gentlemen, but that's the way I see it.
And so do you feel, John or Jim, that there is something uniquely, that kind of going back to my earlier question, that America, there is something morally superior about us, about our nation, that we're trying to preserve in some sense, that Donald Trump is trying to resurrect or go back to, or, do you feel like
I don't know that he's trying to go back to. He's reacting to the things we've been observing in the last 10 years. And those are real simple. We used to believe that people were innocent until proven guilty. We used to have statements like sticks and stones will break our bones, but now they call it bullying. Words will never hurt you, but now you're called a bully. These cliches were really important to teach our children and future generations how to treat each other morally. Yes, it's bad to be a bully. But has it gone too far? I mean, political correctness, I hear surveys and different things. Just for the record, gentlemen, I'm politically irreverent. So I want to go back to a solid agreement on the Constitution, or we debate and we change it. Right now, we're turning it over to judges, in my opinion, and you start to see the Supreme Court. We're not fighting over which judges interpret the law correctly. We're fighting over whether a man had beers when he was in high school. God help me for the future.
Again,
That was hardly what that debate was about, but
yes.
in
my
any case, let me just say that we brought up a term now, political correctness, and of course Donald Trump has made quite a meal out of this concept. It's a concept that began on the right of the political spectrum. The idea being that somehow that people should feel that everything was just fine, but that for political reasons or because you're not allowed to say things, that you avoid saying certain things. Others would point out that this is a call for justice, that in fact African Americans have been treated poorly, and
I agree.
Gay people have been treated poorly, and it's perfectly within the rights of Americans to say that's not okay anymore, and we're not going to do that anymore.
I
and I would
agree
say
about
that's
the treating.
largely what.
But why
what
can't
has
people
been
have their
happening now.
belief systems? You
You
mentioned two
can.
groups that are very realistic, and one of them, people believe, nobody would say you can't control your race. You can't. That's the way you're born. Some of us disagree on the biology of the other choice, but long story short, they have their opinion, picking just out the gay people, sorry if I'm using the wrong terms, but other people have their opinions too, but they're not being allowed to voice them. And when I say political correctness, I mean disciplinary action that occurs when conservatives say or do things. Right now, Facebook is one of those fantastic discussions. Where do I stand and protest?
John, I
Facebook's
think John
behavior?
was
I think that you're making a caricature of what the left thinks. That's what conservatives often do, and I think you're very good at this. Judge Kavanaugh's hearing was not about whether a judge liked to drink beer or not. It's whether he sexually assaulted a young woman.
With no corroboration.
That doesn't mean it didn't
So
happen.
what did you do last Sunday?
It doesn't mean...
I'm just
So
saying,
we're
I don't
trying-
know where
we're-
you
we're
were
starting
last
to-
Sunday.
not
He also
willing to
wasn't
do
on
is-
trial.
Right.
This is about a job.
And you're not
No,
allowing me
this
to-
was
Jim, you're
about
not
a
allowing
job,
me to
and
finish
people
my
were
thought.
defamed.
So we're
You're not
kind
allowed
of.
to not allowing me to finish your thought, and that's another tactic that conservatives like to do.
Thank you.
You talk over people, and I'm aware of it, and people are watching you, and they see you do it, and that's kind of ignorant and stupid.
Oh, thank you for calling me names.
Well,
so you believe
appreciate
you
that.
believe that you are irreverent. That's all right. We'll be irreverent. You believe that you said bullying is just calling people names. Do you think people ought to be able to beat up people that they don't like because of their color of their skin or their gender preference or something
course
like that? Are you in favor of the N-word? Are you in favor of what we saw in Charlotte?
Let's talk about the M word.
So
I'm
that,
talking
No,
about
the M word. We can't even say mob anymore because it's the M word.
I'll
So where are you
say
going to go
mob.
with
Well, I
this?
have any problem
we had a
saying
whole show on the freedom of speech and the limits to which it goes, and
That's what
certainly
makes America great.
Yeah, and I would agree that I think it does make America exceptional in the sense that we do tolerate a lot of offensive speech, a lot of even violent speech to some degree, right? I mean, we have, our libel laws and all these other laws around speech are very weak, right? You're allowed to get away with a lot, and I think there's a certain value to that, right? Allowing different groups,
Yes.
even if they say things that are very offensive and you
and
disagree
no one
with.
will throw you in jail
That's-
for using the N-word
Right,
in
right.
the United States.
And I think
because
that's-
But you will be
protected
called
by-
out for it now.
but
And
peop-
you'll be
but pe-
fired.
But people, that's exercise.
So we have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to kind of recenter us back on our topic today. But this has been a great discussion so far, and I appreciate all of the emotion and enthusiasm and passion that people have. And this is the American. This is it, right? We're talking. We're on TV. We're having a wonderful discussion. Around this subject, and nobody's going to go to jail afterwards. So hopefully not. So recently, President Donald Trump, I'm sure some of you have heard of him, said at the UN, this was like 3 weeks ago, that sovereign independent nations are the only vehicle where freedom has ever survived, democracy has ever endured, or peace has ever prospered. So what do you think of that statement? Is this an abandonment of America as a global moral leader, or as it was kind of memorialized by Ronald Reagan, a shining city on the hill?
So, as I said, Ronald Reagan described America as a shining city on the hill. I'm concerned that the Donald Trump's vision of America is a shining city on the hill with a big wall around it that says it's for certain people only, but not for the rest of the world. And we don't mind maybe if you look in, but we're not really very interested in you. And that's not my vision of what America should be about. I think America should be. We went to war in Europe. My father went to war in Europe to defend people from the onslaught of the Nazis. And that's the sort of thing that America does. We stand up for what's right in the world. And I think that what Trump wants to do is build a wall around us, say we're withdrawing from the rest of the world to the extent that he wants to have an impact. It is a bullying, right? We're going to bully people with our military, with our economy, but we're not interested in cooperation. And we're more interested in conflict.
I want to get back to this idea of what makes whether military prowess and economic power kind of is necessary for America to have influence in the world. But Jim, what are your initial thoughts to his comments there?
Just talking about how we got into World War II is misleading, in my opinion. I believe we got into World War II for the same reason military people say their oath. They swear allegiance to the Constitution, to follow the executive. They don't swear allegiance to the executive, they swear allegiance to the Constitution and to support this country. We went over to Europe, in my opinion, to help other allies defeat a threat to the United States. And the fact that we're comparing that to how Trump speaks is very interesting, because in my little bit of history, Antifa and the Democrats are speaking more like the fascists and the socialists of that day. Now, I don't have any examples at the top of my hand, but again, I don't see conservatives talking like pre-World War II fascists.
But if America is exceptional for a variety of reasons, and we're on to something that if that was replicated throughout the world would bring prosperity and more freedom and more rights to more and more people throughout the world, and hopefully allow more and more humans to flourish, what responsibility does America have to be that shining city on the hill, to kind of push back against the evils that may be in the world? And I mean,
for me, the shining city on the hill had more to do with a theocracy approach to you need to be friends with your neighbor kind of approach. And yes, there are many people that believe that, but again, I cannot accept the fact that we have some moral superiority around the world. I want to protect our Constitution. How many people are in jail in Canada for speaking out against Trudeau? I don't know the number, but I've heard it happens. In France, you can get fined $50,000 for stating your political opinion. Yeah. I think we have agreement that the First Amendment might be agreed to as an exceptionalism. Yeah. The Second Amendment for me is just as passionate, just as powerful. Sure. And my friend over here stated a number before, but I think he'll find that 5 cities carry the lion's share of those shootings.
And I don't want to get off into the Second Amendment because that's a whole other show.
Let me just add a couple of things about that. First of all, the idea of a city on a hill comes from a Puritan sermon, John Winthrop on the Arbella, coming to the New World to found Massachusetts Bay Colony. The first thing I would say about it is when he conceptualized the city on a hill, in many ways he was urging his followers that they needed to follow through on what they were setting out to do. That the eyes of the world would be on them, and if they failed, that they would be, have failed very obviously on a stage. So this was about being an example to the world. Part of the issue that comes with projecting power as we do into the rest of the world is how do you do that morally and when do you do that morally? And it's very easy to problematize many of the choices that the United States has made, including over the last 20 years, with regard to projecting power into the world. Our drone strikes, for example, welcome and us being, moral in the world? Is the money that we're sending to Saudi Arabia right now in relation to the war that's going on in Yemen, is that moral leadership? In lots of ways, we're compromised morally in some fundamental ways. The other thing that I would say about Reagan's version of City Upon a Hill, which included shining City Upon a Hill, speaking to John's point, I'm wondering how shiny the United States, whether behind walls or not, will look to anybody, given some of the ideas that Donald Trump wants to put in place. I don't think it looks very, very attractive to
President
lots
Trump,
of people.
Yeah, he said in that same UN speech, he said, "America is governed by Americans. We reject the ideology of globalism and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism." What are your thoughts there? I mean, the idea is that...
Who is this we? Would
Yeah.
be my
Right,
first thought. He was
agreed.
certainly speaking for himself and his
And me.
strand of the Republican Party, which is not the entire Republican Party. As Jim knows well, there are a lot of divisions within these parties, both Republican and Democratic. So that's the first thing I would say, is it certainly was an assertion of his view, but given the results in 2016 and how many votes he received, he certainly was elected president. I'm not telling you that he was not under the Electoral College, but the idea that he speaks for even most Americans, I think, could be challenged pretty easily.
Yeah. Jim, thoughts? Or John? You look like you want to jump in.
I voted for Trump because of the promises he made. And compared to all the presidents in my lifetime, he's kept the ones that were important to me.
Samuel Johnson once said, "Patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel." And to me, again, this is a bullying. It reeks a little bit of bullying. As I said at the very beginning, I'm happy to be an American. I'm proud to be an American. I love my country, but there are times when, and now is one of them, when I'm not very pleased with what my country has done. And I don't think that that means that I'm not a patriot, not patriotic, but much in the same way that a parent can love their child but be really unhappy that they're in prison, for example, or committed some heinous act. We should be shooting higher and trying to do better. There's nothing unpatriotic about saying our country can't do a better job than it's doing now.
Yeah, and we just have a couple minutes left, but I mean, when I read that statement there, I think, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, it is America first, as Trump has said many times, and that, at the end of the day, it's whatever's best for Americans, kind of be damned the rest of the world, whatever the implications may be. And I'm not saying that that's what he's saying by any means, but I'm saying that sometimes the left perceives it as such, regardless of how our actions, or because we're a leader in the world, we're going to do what's best for us to promote our military, to increase our economic wealth, so on and so forth. And I feel like maybe is there
So I think the
repercussions of that type of thing?
I
We
think
only have a minute left.
I think one problem is that Trump in particular, being a real estate businessman, thinks of deals as being zero-sum games. That the only way if I can win is that if you lose, I will. If I get the best of the deal, I beat you. But in fact, cooperation can make both people better off, and so you can make America better off by making other people well off as well. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, this has been a wonderful discussion this morning. Thank each and every one of you for coming in. We could talk about this for several more hours. But again, I hope everybody this morning appreciated the conversation, learned a little bit more this morning, and hope you have a great Sunday. Thank you, and hope we tune in next week. Goodbye.